Awesome. So thank you everyone that's joining here live, as well as those of you watching at a later point through the recording. Today we have two coaches helping us talk a little bit about offense, and Ahen Kim and Eryn Riley. Ahen, do you want to start by introducing yourself, and then Eryn, you can introduce yourself?
Yeah, sounds good. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I apologize. I'm zooming from my phone, just going through a move right now, and nothing showed up on time. So I apologize if I'm a little bit in and out. Just throw something in the chat. I'll be happy to repeat myself. But kind of like Jared said, I'm Ahen. I am head volleyball coach at Brown. I know you guys were on with Coach Michael from AU yesterday. That's where I was for 6 years prior, as an assistant prior to coming to Brown University. So I've been at Brown for 2 years as a head coach, and prior to that I was at American for 6, and a club volleyball coach for about 9 years as well, coaching everything from 14s to 17s alongside my college resume. So that's just a little bit about me from Philadelphia originally. So hello to anyone that might be zooming in from Philadelphia. But I'll turn it over to Coach Eryn.
Thanks. Well, I'm Eryn Riley. I'm also an assistant coach at Brown. I'm going into my second year there. So I've just been at Brown for a year. Prior to that, I was at Bryant University for 2 years, which is a small Division I also in Rhode Island. Prior to that, coached club for a few years in California, California native, played volleyball out there, but happy to be on the East Coast and happy to be here today.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys both for coming. We're gonna jump right in here. We're gonna talk starting a little bit about talking how to teach setting. So Eryn, if you want to start us off here, if we were in a camp right now, and you had a group of kids that were just beginning, how would you teach them how to set, and what would be your keys to focus on?
I think definitely the biggest keys is just like hands open, shape of the ball, and then starting early over your head, like as early as you can, right on top of that forehead. Even starting like basic where hands are already up, just waiting for the ball, kind of as you progress still, like way before the ball gets there, hands up early, and then just finishing straight through in front. I feel like you kind of hear it at the little kids level a lot, like finishing like Superman or Superwoman, but I think those are definitely the biggest keys. I mean, hands up early and finish where you want that ball to go.
Sure. When you're talking about a beginner who might or might not have the strength to really push the ball out, how much are you focused on arms versus like using your legs to help push and get height on the ball?
Yeah, I think legs are huge. I mean, especially once you go over kind of like hand shape and things like that, focusing on, having that right foot forward and kind of like stepping through the ball. When we're talking about just like basic setting. So like use those arms, but really trying to like step forward through that ball to use both for power, I guess.
Awesome. Let's turn it over to you, Ahen here. Now the next step after you teach kind of the basic, I guess the goal of any setter is to make a ball that someone can hit, right? Something that's high enough in a decent location. But once we kind of take that next step and progress at the higher levels, we start to see more and more setters jump setting. In your work from 14s all the way up to college, at what point do you kind of start to encourage players to try jump setting, and what are the kind of the keys that you look for in teaching that as someone kind of just starts out there?
That's a good question. I'm glad you asked that. I actually, all the years that I've coached, I started off coaching jump setting. So in a lot of setter training, there's just, working with your hands, maybe setting against the wall, maybe using the ball. Kind of like Coach Eryn said, shaping the ball is really important. But for me, when it comes to the movement element of ball, I like to teach jump setting right away because I think there's a rhythm to it. I think the rhythm helps with the tempo of the ball. I think the rhythm helps a lot of athletes set the ball cleanly. And so I kind of try to keep those last steps tight and then straight up and down with the jump. And so I think you can derive a lot of power there as well. When I'm coaching like young kids, I'm actually not that concerned with how strong or weak they are. I know they'll get stronger as they grow older and play the sport more. So I'm trying to get them to derive their strength on setting from the jump and their legs, and then keeping their posture. So whether it's a low posture or a high posture, I don't want their elbows moving so much. I want them to be still and then get really good at jumping into the ball for a little bit more delivery if they need it. I think they will get stronger over time. But I found it more challenging to teach them to just set from their feet and then introduce jump setting later on. Just introduce it all at once. If you're teaching 14-year-olds to spike a ball, you can also teach them to jump set. I think it's not mutually exclusive. I think if you can teach jumping and hitting, you can teach jumping and setting.
Now, when you're teaching someone how to jump set, do you kind of teach them to set the ball at the peak of their jump or kind of on the way up? And does that help them get power at a younger level in order to get the ball high enough?
Yeah, I think I see young players that aren't that strong kind of set it on the way up, or really just they try to jump into that set. I try to encourage the fact that they do it, they try it anyway. I think over time you want them to kind of set on. That's really the goal with it. And so there's this sweet spot of almost to the top where they can deliver the ball and still get some strength and still release at the peak. I think it's really challenging at times, so I just try to encourage the jump setting. And I think a lot of times younger setters that might be a little weaker in the arms, they might try to jump into it, which again, I think that's the lesser of two evils. I think over time as they get stronger, you can teach them to be at the peak. It's just, for me, it's the rhythm of setting that gets really challenging for someone to go from completely on the floor and then to jump. I think you can teach jump setting and they can always default to standing setting, in an out of system situation or on the run. I think teaching them the jump setting part, there's a rhythm element to it. I think if you ever want to coach teaching the quick, I think it helps to start young with jump setters. I think it's really tough for young middles to hit a quick ball when your setters are inconsistent in terms of jumping or not jumping. I think that's a bit of a challenge. And so I think at higher levels, for those that are maybe high school, open level club, and college, you almost want to teach your setters to set the ball at the peak and then even set it on the way. Because even on the way down, it's more deceptive, but you have to have pretty incredible strength in your arms in order to do that.
Gotcha. Eryn, jumping back over to you here. If you are a high school coach, let's just say a JV coach, right? What are you kind of looking for in your setter, or who do you pick to train to be a setter, and what kind of attributes are you looking for?
That's a good question. I definitely think having that strength and location on the ball control is huge, especially at that high school level. We're seeing so much still that 9th grade, it's the first time girls are playing volleyball. So having someone that has that ball control to get that ball to a good location is going to be huge. Also, the intangibles coming with someone with great leadership who's going to be vocal and aggressive and determined is definitely a huge benefit to that. Teaching setting is not always the easiest thing. I think there are kids out there who just have like that really good natural touch to it that you can kind of pinpoint and find. But yeah, ball control is going to be huge just to force that ball out there.
Would you rather try to train the setter that might have a more natural hands, or the setter that might be just your most athletic player?
I think most athletic. I think there's a lot there to work with. Obviously, touch is huge, and you can't teach touch all the time. But having that athletic kid with that control, I think the most athletic.
Okay, yeah. I think coaches might go back and forth with either. And a lot of times you want your most athletic kid to just hit the ball because they're the best hitter. But sometimes there's a lot of value in putting your most athletic kid in the setter spot, especially as kids are trying to figure out what position they might be able to play. I see that as well. Now, at Brown, with your setters, how do you train, and either one of you can answer this, how do you train the idea of decision-making? As the setter, you're kind of running the offense yourself. Are you kind of telling your setters, like, that was the right decision, that wasn't, or kind of letting them run the show themselves and figure it out as they go on?
That's a really good question. I actually learned this from my former boss. You try to give your setter as much freedom as you can, but you want to, in practice, try to figure out what's actually available, right? So it's really a lot of back and forth. I don't like handcuffing my setters. I think a lot of the decision making should happen in the film room and at practice. So what I mean by that is there are situations where we shouldn't set the slide. And so there are some situations where, so this past year we had a right side who we try to encourage her to run off one foot as often as possible. She was just more terminal that way. So there are times that, we had a one-on-one there, but the set looked more forced. And so when the ball gets past 10 feet off, somewhat tight to the right sideline, we just kind of told our setters, that's a situation you don't want to set the right side on, because her approach to the ball is so far over her left shoulder. You're not really maximizing. She's not going to score there. And then the conversely, when we see our opponents try to pigeonhole their hitter into setting that ball, we just kind of bail on that hitter because we just don't think she'll be very terminal. So you kind of learn how to read the other team by learning a little bit about what you can or can't do on your own side of the net. But that's kind of a lot of the conversations we have at practice is who can hit off of, what kind of set can we hit off of based on where the pass takes the setter, if that makes sense. And so we spend a lot of time just kind of tossing balls into different positions of the court, and then just trying to get really comfortable with setting the long ball on the go to the outside, and then just getting a rhythm for that, and then versus going the other way when the ball gets passed over to zone 4, setting to the right side, trying to get a rhythm for that. And then we just also came out with ideas of, in this situation, when the ball gets past 10 feet off, tight to the right sideline, we're never going to set the slide. We can set the right side if she runs off 2 feet maybe, but we'll just never set the slide there because we just didn't feel like we were very terminal in that situation. So we just want to give as much information on where we can get a really tough swing off a set. I think those numbers in terms of how you are varies on the opponent, but one of the things that we can just strike off in terms of the setting decision-making checklist and to make it easier for them is to just kind of give them some guidelines on don't set the slide in situation because we can't even get a hard swing off. One of the big things I think a lot of coaches talk about is, in terms of running an offense, you can run it super fast or you can slow it down. But no matter how you want to run it, the ball has to be hittable. And by hittable, I mean give the hitter some options to hit hard in at least 2 directions. And so if we feel like we can't do that, we just kind of start crossing those things off as those aren't actual options to set. And then beyond that, we just try to tell our setters to use their eyes as much as possible. Do you see a one-on-one opportunity or do you not? But we try to make sure their options are limited to those scenarios where we can actually get a hard swing off.
Sure. So how much do you focus on your setters being able to set up one-on-ones versus just be hittable? So like at the 14 and under level, right, you just want the ball to be hittable. At the college level, you might be talking a little bit more to your setters about, we got to set this because it's one-on-one, because the other middle went here or there. Kind of at what point does that transition for you and the teams that you've worked with?
Yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with stat taking as the match goes on. I think you can learn a lot as the match progresses and see kind of which blocks you're doing a good job on. So as we get down to the wire, it's more Sophia Miller. We gave her the ball a lot, even in a 3-option situation, because she was one-on-one because the middle ran quick and kind of kept the middle where we wanted her to be. So we were able to set her, and she was pretty terminal because of it. But there were situations where we set her anyway, in terms of, she was just that much more terminal than everyone else on the team, even against the double block in a lot of situations. So that varies from matchup to matchup through the net. But just for the simplicity, going back to your question about decision making, we try to make sure we have an attacker in any 2 or 3 option situation tight to the pins on the antennas. That way we're stressing our opponent to make a decision to go the full length of the net one way or the other. So anytime, our middle on a 2-option pass runs that gap, some of you guys call it a 31 or something like this, we're essentially overloading that position in transition. So our setter always know that, because we ran a 6-2 last year, our slide hitter is available and she will most likely be one-on-one. So she automatically knows that because we talked about it. In that situation, when the ball gets dug or passed there, we automatically know our middle is going to run in the gap. Their middles have to make a decision early. Well, we're likely going to have a one-on-one on the right side. And then we'll start going that direction until we see their middle make a change. Or as the match progresses and our outside might be on fire, we'll just set her anyway because the double block hasn't shown that they can stop it in transition. So again, we kind of play that by ear, match to match. But I think at 0-0, set 1, we generally go, and find the one-on-one given the situation. So there's another situation where the ball gets passed kind of in between zone 2 and zone 3. Our middles are going to run a 1 really tight to the right side. So if their middle commits to our middle, we know, our setters automatically know as soon as the ball gets passed, not waiting for their middle to react, but as soon as the ball gets passed, we're probably going to have a one-on-one on the outside. And so we already have a pre-programmed notion of, based on where the ball gets passed to, we already know where to find the one-on-one. And that's simply because the play calling for us is we want to make sure there's an attacker on the pin on both ends of the
and a lot of that happens in the film room for you working with that, correct?
Yeah, a lot of that's in the film room, and then we just go right onto the court and just kind of rep that out and create those scenarios. And it's really good training for our middle blockers too on the other side, because then they have to make some of these decisions. We try to teach our setters to kind of look through the net, just to take a quick look before they make those plays. It creates a little hesitation out of their middle blockers as well. So we do a couple things to even create hesitation from the defense. But yeah, we kind of see that in the film room, and we kind of look at how most people react.
Awesome. All right, we're going to transition on a little bit to hitting. Eryn, kind of back to my first setting question. Let's talk about the same thing for hitting. If you're going to teach someone pretty new to the sport what it takes to be a good hitter, how do you go through that?
Yeah, I think a lot of us have been there where we're trying to teach, a 3-step or 4-step approach to kids, and they just cannot get it with feet and arms and all the moving together. So I definitely think, the 2 most important things to stress to them is just your last 2 steps need to be to the ball, right? Whether you're taking a 3-step, 4-step, 20-step approach, whatever, get those last 2 steps to the ball. And then get your arm up early, frame super early, and swing high. Because I think, I taught a non-travel team that was a bunch of 7-year-olds one year. I had 27-year-olds. I'm trying to teach how to do an approach, and no one's getting all the steps and the footwork and the arms and all that and all these different keys with it. But I think when you really break it down to what's most important is just those last 2 steps to the ball. And then frame that arm and that shoulder up early. Both arms up. Can't be up too early.
All right. Here's a question I want to ask, and I want each one of you to answer this. A player that has been playing for a little while, that's a goofy-footed approach. As a coach, do you try to change it or do you leave it?
In college, no.
Yeah, no.
I mean, we're recruiting these kids, so you kind of know that what you're getting. I personally, if I took a kid that was goofy footed, I think at that point I probably wouldn't change it. If it was so, if it was so, if it was so crazy to the point where I felt like I couldn't train her in some other ways, I probably wouldn't recruit her. But if I recruited her, it's because she has some gifts and I can oversee the goofy footed part. So at least at the college level, I don't really look at whether I think I consider whether someone is goofy footed or not, but if I recruit her, I'm probably most likely not going to change it too bad. I mean, I've seen goofy footed hitters, throw it back to, American University, had a really good opposite named Magda. This is even before I coached there. I mean, she jumped high and hit hard, and she was mostly a right side, so I think she came in slightly goofy footed, but she was able to hit line anyway. So when you're talking about hitters that can hit in all directions, and if the goofy footed thing to me doesn't change her ability to hit hard with some shots, I'm not as worried about it. I think at the juniors and club level, I've never. I'll try to change it, especially the younger the kid is, because I just think that from a strength perspective, the goofy footed thing inhibits the core to be as involved to kind of rotate into the swing, which is where a lot of the power is generated in the attack. The one thing I'll say about a goofy footed hitter, if it never changes, a lot of that power ends up coming from the back and the shoulder, because a little bit of that rotation isn't quite there, or she rotated her hips too early and she's goofy footed that way. So, I think you just kind of have to see it at the college level. At the juniors level, I mean, if she's really comfortable and she's just kind of adapted to it, I think it's case by case. Generally, I'd probably try to change it, especially if they're 14, 15, 16. Beyond that, I'm like, if she's really effective anyway, at that point, do you change it? And then also, how frustrating is it and how difficult is it just for the athlete to change what she's already kind of become accustomed to scoring with?
And Eryn, what about you? A high schooler, 15, 16, 17-year-old, do you try to change it?
I mean, I'm kind of on the same with Ahen. I mean, if they're like super young, super green to volleyball and like new, I think you try to change it. But I kind of agree. I mean, the more comfortable they are, if it's something that's effective for them and it's working and it's not like diminishing any sort of power. I mean, I think it's really hard when you're 17 and you've been playing for a few years to go back and completely change those like motor pathways. Super frustrating for coaches and players alike. So, I mean, I think the newer it's volleyball and the younger they are, go for it, change it. It can most likely only benefit and create more power. But the more set in their ways they are, if it's something that's working for them, try to figure out how to work with them.
Sure. Now, we'll talk a little bit about this more tomorrow with the defensive side, but most of the time when I see hitters swinging a ball, they're almost always hitting straight ahead. You very rarely see someone approaching this way and all of a sudden they just turn this way last minute when they're in the air. How do you guys teach kind of a range of shots and hitting, and how are your hitters trying to be deceptive with that versus just taking like an angle this way to the ball and I hit here, or an angle this way to the ball and I hit here? Do you guys work with your hitters on that, kind of expanding the range?
Yeah, I mean, we spend a little bit of time every day working on, line and angle. One of my favorite drills, I actually did this in club, because I think you're exactly right. I think a lot of young kids, especially really good athletes at 14, 15, and 16, I think that, if they're really good athletes, just jumping high, just crushing the ball. For a lot of young kids, I just think it's developed really late. And so when they get to 17 open or 16 open or 18 open or college, they realize like, hey, maybe I shouldn't hit low seam straight ahead anymore because I get blocked 80% of the time. So now they do have to change what they're doing. So, I try to work on it a little bit every day. And then also with the approach. So we'll do an angle into zone 4 approach and hit straight ahead, wrist down to try to encourage and expand their range. How comfortable are you hitting hard angle? When you hit the zone 5 straight ahead, usually a libero is standing there anyway. And again, as you get to higher levels, the liberos become better and better at adapting to the hard-driven balls and putting that in a good place. So we want to make the libero move to her left as much as possible. And so we talk about that a lot, just hitting straight ahead and a little bit of thumb down to hit a little bit more of an angle. And then we talk about angle approach and rotating into the line shot, whether it's across your body or completely rotating your power behind it. As long as you're jumping and approaching in an angle, I think that rotation in the air is still somewhat deceptive. But the other thing that we work on, and it's not to promote goofy footedness, which is what you kind of talked about. We talked about the inside out approach, and I don't know how many coaches actually work on this, but I think it's really valuable to work on the inside out approach, meaning, that scenario where the outside hitter digs the tip and then they don't get to go as far out as possible. If I'm going to encourage a fast offense, my outside hitter just might practically not be able to go as far wide as we'd all like them to, right? Otherwise, the option would be for my outside to bump the ball really high when they're in that tip coverage zone, and then it gives their defense more time to react. So I like to tell my outside hitters to kind of pass the ball low, as not so low that they take themselves out, but try to put some tempo on that first pass. Is not going to allow them to take space as wide as they want. So we work on inside out a lot. So when you go inside out, you kind of hit straight ahead the line, but then also opening up your hips in the air and then turning it back over to zone 4 if possible. So we work on 2 different angles of approach, hitting both line and angle. And I feel like if we can work on line and sharp angle, we can probably hit everything in between those 2 extremes.
Sure, makes sense. So we got a question in the chat that I'll answer now. And the question is, do you think there might still be a benefit to fixing a hard-hitting goofy footer to try to make them an even better hitter? And I'm kind of on a similar page as Ahen and Eryn on the fixing the goofy footed. At the college level, I would say the big thing is like most of our athletes are towards the end of their playing career, right? And so we're trying to get the most out of them now. If you are going to change a thing like being a goofy footed hitter for a player, they're going to have a dip in their performance for some time before it might have the potential to get higher. And so that's why I think we're on a similar page saying that a younger player, right, it's okay to have that dip because they have the time to really make that long-term improvement later. But it might not be so the case for someone who's a little bit later. Looks like we just lost Ahen, so he might have just lost internet. So Eryn, it's just you and I. Yep. Okay, so we are. Oh, there he is. Let me unmute him. Okay, Ahen's back here. So we are going to move on to talking about systems a little bit. Eryn, can you tell me? Can you describe for me a 5-1 offense versus a 6-2, or any other things that you've experienced, ways of setting up your offense as a coach?
Yeah, so I mean, 5-1 offense, you've got 5 players on the court that are non-setters, and then one of them that is strictly a setter. So they're, back row setter, front row setter, they're going all the way around. I mean, a 5-1 could be set up. I've seen 5-1 set up in a very interesting way where I've seen someone like sub out a different setter to play the front row than the back row. Maybe they're just taller, have a little bit more help offensively, things like that. And then a 6-2 is actually what we ran mostly last year. So setter's always back row. So setter, I mean, for us, we're a little bit funky. We had our setters opposite our middles last year, which we'll kind of get into later. But I mean, setter opposites of your right sides, and as they make a rotation and they go to become front row, a second setter subs in for that other right side to be back row. And definitely 2 very different offenses. We started last year with a 5-1, which definitely helped us utilize, our middle. We had a slide running middle, so that helped a lot to be able to split those 2 hitters, to have hitters on the pins at both times, or to be able to just have both hitters in front. The 6-2, though, I mean, it gives you the options of having 3 front row hitters the entire time. We still had like a slide hitting right side in a way, so a little funky on our part, but yeah, definitely benefits both depending on the personnel that you've got. We don't have overly huge offensive setters on our team right now, so the 6-2 kind of made more sense for us.
Sure. All right. Okay, we got a question here. Do you prefer your setter to follow your middle in your rotation, or middle follow your setter? I'll answer this by going in, sharing my screen here. You guys can all see this, right? Eryn, Ahen, I think you guys are the only ones unmuted, right? Okay.
Yeah, we've done it.
Okay. We're going to go rotation by rotation. This is kind of what I would put together as like a typical 5-1 rotation here, with the net at the bottom here and the net at the bottom here. I typically have my outsides following my setter. And so you can see here it goes setter, outside, our OH1 in zone 2, our MB2, our second middle, starting in the middle front, our opposite starting in the left front, and then you have your OH2 and MB1. Yeah, an MB1 versus MB2, the 1 typically means that you're next to the setter, and then the 2 typically means you're on the other side of the setter. And so you have your 1 here and your 1 here. And that gets important in a 5-1 because your MB1s and OH1s are going to be with your setter when they're in the front row 1 extra time. And so when a setter's front row, you might have less offensive options. And so it might be more important to put your better attackers up there with your setters. And so this is typically a rotation 1. I've got my OH1 front row, my MB2 front row, and then my opposite front row. Another pretty typical way of setting this up is to stack your OH1 over here on this side. You can move your libero into zone 1 and your OH2 over here into zone 6. And then you kind of run everything off the whole right side. If you take it over to rotation 2, you'd have your opposite, your MB2 and OH2 as your front row attackers. I have arrows here for my back row attackers because this was originally put together for my men's team. We don't do as much back row attacking with my women's team, but you can see here, this would be kind of the setup for rotation 2. If you're going to be writing your lineups in at the start of the game and looking to start in rotation 2. Rotation 3 here, we'd have a little bit of a stack here with your OH2 coming back to pass in rotation 5 or in zone 5. Your MB1 staying kind of up here and typically staying in front. And then your opposite hitting on the right side here. You take it into rotation 4 here. You finally have your setter front row. So these are your 2 hitter situations where you have your MB1 and OH2 up here. A lot of times in the women's game, you'd have your MB1 running a slide here. Taking it on to rotation 5, you'd have your MB1 and your OH1 as your 2 front row options. A lot of times in the women's game, I see a defensive specialist put into the opposite and potentially even one of the outsides. And so if you have a DS in there in this opposite spot, you may consider putting them in the serve receive rotation. And you can see the lineup down here for rotation 5. And then rotation 6 would be a 2-hitter situation. A lot of times your MB2 would also run a slide. Unless your MB2 might not be as good of a slide hitter, then they might stay in front a little bit more. And so that's kind of a typical setup for a 5-1. For a 6-2, it would be rotations 1, 2, and 3, kind of set up in a similar way with just certain people flipped. And your setter going in for your op and your op going in for your setter in that flip in rotation 4. Now, what Eryn was alluding to earlier, these are actual numbers of what Brown had set up. Eryn, do you want to kind of walk us through these and tell us why you set it up this way and what was different and unique about it?
Yeah, so when you look, at the little lineup at the bottom, so number 20 is our setter, and number 19 was one of our middles. So we actually had them set up opposite to each other. So just kind of flipped our opposite and right side there in terms of rotation. And then, our outsides stayed in the same spot. And the same thing, we go through, so that'll go through rotation 1, 2, and 3. So our middle is immediately front row for the first 3 rotations. And then when we get to rotation 4, we just subbed in. So our other setter would sub in for our middle, and then our middle for our setter. So kind of switched it up a little bit differently. A big part of why we did this, we had we had middles that we were looking to have serving at the time, or playing defense for us, and running a 6-2 tends to eat up a few more subs. So putting in maybe a serving specialist or a DS with, trying to keep in our subs, pending a long set or something, just wasn't an issue that we really wanted to run into. So we paired our setters up more with our middles, in terms of who ran better off of who and who worked best with each other. And same thing, like we lined our outsides up that way as well. So just with the personnel that we had, it made more sense. We had some injuries early on that kind of switched some things up for us, and it just led us to a lot of conversations and a lot of drawing on whiteboards to figure out what the best thing for us. And we kind of landed on this kind of early on in conference, honestly, and stuck with it.
Yeah. And so in this situation, they had their libero subbing in for their opposite. Yeah. Whereas a typical 6-2, you'd have your libero subbing in for your middles. And so it was a little bit unique. In certain rotations, it almost looks the same. So you can see here in rotation 1, it's a pretty similar setup to what you would see normally, except they have one of their middle hitter really going for a slide and their opposite really going in the middle. So it just looks a little bit different. Honestly, as someone that was scouting it, I was watching for 5 minutes and I'm like, oh wait, something's a little bit different here. And you gotta look for it to figure it out.
Yeah, it definitely helped because like 7 was our opposite. So it kind of gave her the option to run that slide. She's our slide hitting opposite. So in 1 and 6, like she's running all the way across the court, but it kind of benefits because it gives us that third hitter in that type of situation because she was running a slide anyway, except for in some of those situations that Ahen was mentioning where, if the ball's passed right in zone 2, we're going to kind of avoid that a little bit, puts her in a tough situation. But she was a better server than both of our middle options as well. So we had her back there to just kind of bomb balls. So it was perfect for our libero to go in for our other opposite and to have her back there as a serve.
Sure. So looking at this, from my perspective, it would seem like rotation 3 and rotation 6 might be your tougher rotations to side out, just because of the cross right from the start. A lot of times that can get tricky depending on the pass and potentially knocking some offensive options out of it. How did you guys work with any of these crossing attacks, with kind of who went in front and who went behind? Because honestly, your slide to number 7 is pretty quick, as well as your 1 ball, right? And so you had 2 first tempo attacks with one of those having to run halfway across the court. How did you make sure that they weren't just completely taken out of the play?
Yeah, so I think in rotation 3, Ahen kind of alluded to it. We had a rookie of the year outside that in our decision making, we kind of just gave her a lot of balls. So I know, especially when things got jumbled, that was number 15 for us. So rotation 3, it was easy. She was kind of our go-to a lot of times right away in that rotation. But it was there was a lot of trial and error in practice, people running into each other. We ended up kind of figuring it out. We tried to keep that slide, our middle would typically kind of go behind in that situation. So we tried to keep our slide like along the 10-foot line, hoping that there wasn't as much of a jumble there. we never really, like, we kind of attempted with like 19 hitting maybe a slide or just hitting on the right side, but it wasn't something that we ended up sticking with at all. Didn't think it was going to be the best option for us. So I think rotation 3, it was a lot. Go to Sophia on the outside, kind of figure that out. And then rotation 6, I don't think we didn't struggle as much with this one in serve receive. I know 3 and 4 were typically our two struggle rotations, but in 6 it kind of worked out. We were able to get number 7 the ball quite a bit. We didn't set our middles too much out of serve receive, so I think that benefited a lot. You know, they were kind of just that decoy there to get out of the way, run something quick for us, but we really focused on going to the pins in 6 for sure.
Awesome. All right, so I'm actually going to pull up some video here of the Harvard versus Brown match. Hold on, I had accidentally muted Ahen, and I think he's unmuted now. Are you good, Ahen?
I'm good.
Okay, awesome. I got a question here. This 6-2 with setter subbing from middles is commonly used by TAV teams, perhaps allowing for strong setter and middle connections. Any inspiration from TAV, Ahen?
You know, when I was a club coach, I did play against Ping a lot. Kind of 0-2 against him, so I need to get back to the club and scratch that itch. But no, it was kind of like Eryn said. It was more about what makes sense. We ran a more traditional 6-2 with Thailand. She actually ended up getting hurt in preseason, so I really liked her serve. I really liked her dig, even if it was for one possession. It really came down to, I think a lot of times I try to think as practically as possible. You want to protect each side out as much as possible. And then on the flip side, you want your toughest servers going back to serve. My middles were not the middles. Audra and Jackie were pretty good at blocking. Jackie ended up being 3rd in our school for blocks historically. So those were more of their gifts. Serving the ball and defense was not their gift. Audra was a freshman. She's 6'4", and I really had a hard time just watching her exist back there. So I had to get rid of them out of the back row. I want all of my players as a coach to position them to be successful. And so by allowing my setter to sub in for the middles, I get to utilize both my setters serving. I get to kind of hide my middle weaknesses, which was serving and defense for those two in particular. And then it really allowed my opposite to serve. We were always trying to figure out how to let our opposite serve anyway. Even when we ran the more traditional 6-2, we wouldn't sub our setter in right away for a defensive position. This is something we did the year before, actually. We would let that setter, or we would let Eliza, number 7, serve the ball, let her play defense without a setter on the floor, because she had a good hard nose for playing defense. So we just assumed we'd be out of system anyway, for the most part. And generally when you're out of system, you have to defend and attack. Maybe we get a one option pass or dig, we're going to set it to the outside anyway. So we kind of played it that way. So by doing the setter middle, it was actually better for us because we had a setter on the floor even as Eliza played defense. We just had to put her in the middle back, I believe, when she was or left back or something like that when she played defense. So it ended up being a better adjustment for us. I know other teams probably have used it. It just came down to us sitting there, kind of like Eryn said, just sitting on the whiteboard, staring at it, messing with some things. We even jot down, what are all our kids' strengths? What can all our kids do really well? What are they not doing well? Is there a way to hide our weaknesses and give life to the things that we think we can score with? And that's just kind of where we landed.
Sure. All right. So I'm going to start playing this. I've got all good passes and medium passes in both of our rotation 1s. So we're going to talk a little bit about rotation 1 as we go through. This isn't slow-mo just because Zoom is a little glitchy if you go regular speed here. But kind of like we showed a little bit earlier, they have number, I think this is 19?
Yeah.
This is 10. This is 19 here coming for a 1 ball. and then 7 goes around for the slide in this rotation.
Jared, can you run that back?
Yep.
So, earlier, this kid, you can pause it on the ball there. You know, that's a situation. You know, Liza's got a great run at this thing, which is great. She's gonna be able to do something aggressive with the ball as long as the ball's set in a range. I would have loved to see my setter set the outside here, just in that particular situation, because of, you know, the middle is slightly closer to zone 2 than she is zone 4, right? And that's based on what the ball kind of went her. So I'm just kind of nitpicking there. To be quite honest, the slide setting is not a bad decision because the ball gets passed pretty middle. But the further the pass goes towards zone 2, my setters automatically know, hey, I should probably shoot that ball out to the outside. And so those are kind of scenarios that we would look at in film.
A good example of
they created the ball get natural. You know, passers aren't perfect. They pass slightly towards zone 4. She was able to set that ball behind. You can see Eliza's slide from like essentially the middle of the court there. You know,
yeah.
I think we actually took that from Stanford. There's a couple of different ways to set the slide. You don't have to approach so tight to the net the whole time. If you approach that slide from further back, you can actually get more balls into the hitter's hitting window.
Yeah, and going back to your point of we're running the gap or the 3 here, our middle has to kind of respect it, and it's a really long way to get over to try to help out with that slide. And I think our middle did an okay job, just a little bit late, and ends up getting tooled a little bit. But not a bad touch.
We just try to create scenarios to stress the opponent as much as possible.
So here on the Harvard side, we did end up stacking over here a lot. We were running a 6-2. Both of our opposites were lefties, and neither one of them was very good on the outside in rotation 1. And so both of them ended up running across in the middle of the play, and that kind of was just because of their weaknesses on the outside. It was okay. I think they did a pretty good job of trying to get over there, but at times, here's a good example. I think they feel rushed from running all the way over there and then trying to get outside, then make a play back into the court. It took them out a little bit, and so I think this is a little bit one of our tougher rotations for that reason as they run across. Depending on how low the serve is, it could kind of slow them down, or depending on how early they try to leave and get away with that. You can see here our opposite is definitely waiting to try to get across, but a high pass, they're okay in a good position, but anything faster, our opposite's kind of out of it there. We'll just go a couple more here. Again, perfect situation of it just gets messed up. Her trying to run across there. It ended up being a bad decision to try to set that right on top of her with that approach coming in right on her. Probably would have just liked to see an outlet outside set. I'm kind of surprised that she even got that over. All right, let's move on to rotation 2. All right, so we don't have too many good passes in these rotations, but this is what 2 looks like. So you guys have Since this person in the opposite spot is really your middle, she's kind of stacked farther over. And
Yeah, she pushed
yeah.
up here. Row 2 ends up being pretty great for us in the sense that like no one really has to go anywhere.
Yeah.
So there's some scenarios where it ended up making things a little easier for us. So no matter where Harvard served the ball, we didn't get that jumbling effect that you guys experienced in row 1 in that situation. So we just need to pass the ball a little better. Obviously, that's not an ideal place to pass. It's one of those situations where when we got the ball passed there, we really didn't want to go behind.
Sure. And then you can see on ours a little bit more traditional as this person is our opposite, kind of sneaking out off the left side here to make an approach. And then our middle is kind of coming around. And this would be a little bit more of the traditional lineup. So there's kind of what you were talking about, getting that one-on-one on the outside with your top out outside hitter here. Your middle runs a one ball. Setter makes a good decision on the outside. The Harvard middle kind of has to respect that one there, makes the move to the wrong side, leaves a one-on-one. Is this kind of the ball you were talking about, trying to set the right side slide here, Ahen?
Yeah, you want to run that back. I mean, there's a couple things we kind of have to unpack here. For us, it's really ideal if you pause it there. It's really ideal if she can. It's going to be a heads up play, so you're getting a one-on-one on the right side. We know that, and this is where I give my setters a little bit of discernment. It's kind of up to her to figure out if this is a ball that she can deliver in tempo so that our right side can hit the ball. I think one of the challenges here with the slide hitting right side is it's a little harder to make an adjustment if the set is a little bit high, low, hang it too much, as opposed to hitting off 2 feet. So that's where Harvard has lefties. If I had a lefty who just ran a traditional off of 2 feet, I probably would have liked my setter setting the back set here. But with the slide, I kind of leave it up to Kristen to kind of feel that out. If you feel like she can be successful, go for it. I give her the green light. I don't mind her going for that one. She probably just didn't feel comfortable in this situation. You see Harvard's middle is hedged over to Sophia. But the other thing we do is we get our outsides ready for these two blocker situations a lot. So we talk about it, we work on it a lot, but it's just a fact of being an outside. You have to be prepared for it.
So we had a question in the chat. Essentially, it comes down to how much are your players audibling based on the location of the pass, or how much are they kind of sticking to the predetermined, this was the play call before the serve, and going from there?
Yeah, we actually do a lot of audibling. One thing we're not even talking about is out of system transition. I'll get to that in a second. In serve receive, we don't really audible a lot on the pins. We already know that we want to stress their defense on the full length of the net. So we know we're going there. Our middles have to audible. So whether they're still going to stay true on the quick ball, whether they're going to move to the gap, we just talk about our middles audibling as much as possible. I kind of, instead of setters really telling, if our setters don't tell our middles what to do, we pretty much they just know run quick unless told otherwise. And then if the ball isn't passed perfect, they'll do something different, whether they go 1 foot right behind or whether they go in the gap in front. So there's some audible there. And then we audible a lot out of system. So Eliza, our right sides need to communicate to Even in transition in any situation, our right sides have to audible whether they're running slide or off of 2 feet, because that gives my setters some decisions. If they're audibling off of 2 feet, they might want to go the other direction. They just kind of have to know what kind of ball. If it's off of 2 feet, she's going to hang it more. So she needs that information early. Our outside like to audible on or off when the setter takes the first ball. We just try to be really terminal in the out of system situation. So I think most coaches say 5 and 5, like hang it up there somewhere, and there's a time and place for it. But we have our outsides a little bit smaller; they're not really hitting over top of anybody. So we're trying to tool. We're trying to hit the outside hand of the block. So we try to do some different things to audible in out of system situations. But in system, we just want to run fast, and we want to, we don't want to. We almost want to go into autopilot. So we don't want to overthink it. We just want to know when we know we have a good 3-option pass or even a good 2-option pass, even if we're digging a 2-option dig or there's a free ball. I just want to give them permission to fly.
Sure, awesome. Rotation 3 here. So you can see here for us, our opposite serve, good serve. You can see here for us, our opposite just staying on the right side. We have a middle coming around for a 1 ball. Sometimes she runs a 31 or a gap, and then our outside is typically staying on a typical go ball or hut, depending on the timing and the speed. We don't do too much different in this rotation. It's pretty consistent. With the lefty right side, there's not too many crosses that we want to do anyway. It's typically most efficient for us to stay pin to pin.
Nice job defense from my setter and from the opposite. You can see the opposite serving from way back there, and then she actually made a dig earlier down the line. So again, decisions like that, seeing what they can do in preseason, just kind of always knowing what your players can do in some non-traditional ways, kind of help give life to some non-traditional rotation side out patterns.
So going back to just the lineup here, the difference here in their rotation 3 is they have to run across with their middles coming over here, and then their opposites running around for a slide. Look at our middle making a dig there.
Yeah, that was a heck of a dig.
So you guys are having your middle going front, and then your slide approach starts a little bit farther back to deal with that cross. Is that right?
Yeah.
So the tough part is it's these types of situations when the pass isn't quite perfect. With that cross, it's pretty easy to get stuck into almost a one-option situation.
Yeah, no, I think almost in any situation, that's just a tough place to pass. That's like off the net, right sideline. It's really tough to put the setter in that situation. It's even tough to set that ball from sideline to sideline. So that's where working on the pipe or even the bick, kind of feed the middle back attacker, really is a good bailout.
So this is the type of ball earlier, right? About what, 12 feet off, that you don't really want your setter setting that slide here, right?
Yeah, I think she's far enough away from the right sideline where I feel like she might be able to pull it off. Is that still Eliza up there? She's
No, Cam.
So this should be Kimberly.
Yeah.
So, we kind of gauge with all of our right sides who can hit this ball or not. So it's not a question of should we or shouldn't we. It's more of a question of, is this a ball that can hit? And so every setter needs to kind of have that relationship with their hitters to figure out, is this a location that my hitters can hit a ball off of, even prior to the set. And so, one other option to just create a little bit of isolation we could do is kind of set the bick here, just right behind the left shoulder, or just right behind her. And, you can see our middle back. I think that should be, is that McKenna?
Yeah, McKenna's back.
Yeah, you can. She's looking for it, the middle back player. And so for me, the options here would have actually been my outside in the middle back or my outside in the front row.
Yeah. And what he was talking about earlier in terms of the location of the pass, if you're coming here and 12 feet off, you're kind of right in the way of that slide approach. And
Yeah.
so if the setter is farther away towards the left side hitter, you might have the angle to be able to hit it. It's a tough location-wise set if it's too far, but the close side set, in that kind of approach angle of your slide attacker, you definitely don't want to set it. Kind of going back to the problem that we saw when we set our right side hitter back in zone 1, we were right in that approach angle. Bad decision to do that there. All right, let's do a few more here, and then we'll jump on. Rotation 4, 5, and 6 are gonna be a little bit just repeats as 1, 2, and 3, with both of us being in a 6-2 with just different people. And so it kind of just changes the options and what we might like to do in different situations there. So let's go rotation 4. And we'll go through these next 3 pretty quickly. You can see here again, their other opposite is running a slide, middles 1 or 3, depending on where the pass is. Outside's typically sticking to the pin. For us, we got a similar thing. Our right side running across. In this game, this was actually our other setter. And so we had a setter, she set in the back row and she hit in the front row. We had one other opposite play throughout the season as well. That was sometimes one of our front row opposites. And then this situation, honestly, so this opposite is one of, I guess, four opposites that played for us this past year. She was pretty much the only righty. And so we would have had a decent option to just keep her on the left side, have this passer pass over in 1 and hit on the right side. I think we did this here because this passer isn't as good on the right side as she is on the left. And so that was just a personnel decision whether to stack or split there. And let's jump over to rotation 5. Again here, pretty similar lineup. And this is our other opposite. So I guess we had 4 opposites playing this match. Pretty standard. Again, same as our row 2 with that opposite running back, middle coming around. That's a pretty good audible. I like that decision from our setter, trying to find that middle there in some really open space. And same thing from Brown here. No crossing patterns, pretty straight up in this rotation. And we'll jump to rotation 6. Finish up. And again, like we showed on the paper earlier, the PDF document, Brown has a crossing pattern here, just a different emphasis on who they might want to set. So I like that decision as well, kind of what Ahen was talking about earlier. pass is kind of a little bit more middle. Our middle's running more of a 31. This is a tougher ball for the middle to catch up to. She did a pretty good job of staying neutral. That 31 would have been open as well. This is just a middle that we don't set as much. So I'm guessing that the brown middle wasn't too worried about her getting the ball. All right, I think that's good for Phil. Eryn, do you have a couple drills that you could share with us working on offense?
Yeah, I can actually. Do you want me to screen share one of them?
Yeah, go ahead and screen share from here.
I'm unable to.
Oh, okay. Yes. You should be able to now.
Perfect. All right, we kind of do a couple. So this is kind of more of an offensive one. This one we call it offense or buy. So in this situation, we were lucky enough to have the numbers to be able to make 3 teams of 6 this year with our other assistant coach playing. So basically, this is kind of like a 5-ball sequence. So there's a serve, and then we would do 4 free balls. So the side on the other side is our offensive team, and the goal is to win 3 out of the 5 balls. If they win 3 out of the 5, they get to stay on, kind of like a queen of the court type situation. So they'll stay on, and then the next team will come on. So that's kind of how we did it. So the big focus is just on scoring as the offense. We've done this drill also in the flip side as like a defense or buy. So basically then it's literally just the opposite. The defensive side is scoring. We've also done this, we're lucky enough to have the numbers that we could do 3 teams, especially when everyone was healthy. But we've done this with just 2 teams as well and kind of kept a tally of just how many different situations that they've run. So they're finishing out their free balls.
So this was in preseason. We recorded all of our 6-on-6 in preseason because that's something we can watch and evaluate and give our team feedback on. This is obviously much more of a free ball transition drill. So this is working on their audible. This is working on the pace of the game, the speed. We're constantly here really emphasizing how to give the ball to the setter to just keep things fast. So I believe with offense or buy, the offensive team needs to score 3 or more of these free ball transition plays in order to stay on. So every time they stay on, they score a point. And so it's kind of like the defense side, just a lot of chatter, a lot of, hey, go stop the other side, a lot of, you can see this game should be weighed to the offense more than it is for the defense. So
we even kind of skewed the points a little bit too. So if you won 3 out of 5, you got 1 point. If you won 4 out of 5, you got 2 big points. And if you won all 5, you would get 3 big points, especially when we didn't have the numbers and we were just doing 2 different teams. So the more offensive points that you scored out of the 5 balls, the more points you got as a team.
So I don't know how much you're going to be able to see this in this drill. This is, again, also not as much of a side-off drill. Again, this is preseason. We're trying to get back for the game. We're trying to be able to move, kind of stress the speed, the tempo of what we're doing, make the actual game a little easier when we get around to it. But one of the things we started working on is actually when the setter takes the first ball, who should take the second ball? And because we had so many slide hitting right sides, not that they can't hit off of 2 feet, it was just kind of by the numbers. In any out of system situation for us, I think it just made sense to set the ball to the outside hitter front row. So anytime you see the setter take the first ball, you might see our middle back player setting our front row outside. So our middle back outside hitter setting the front row outside hitter. We just thought that it was a better ball than a libero or a middle setting over their shoulder or bump setting. We just thought that the middle back player can actually take it with hands and put it in a better spot so that we can take a real rip at that outside as an outside out of system with the intention of scoring.
And what are you saying?
We're in the system a lot.
Go ahead. I was going to say, one of these things with any of these drills that you guys might pick up with your teams, depending on your level, I would encourage you to really mess with the scoring to try to make it right for your level. And so there's some offensive drills that at the college level, we're expecting a pretty high level of execution. You can modify that depending on the level of your team to make sure that they're being pushed, but they can also achieve these goals. Awesome. Let's move on to some questions in the chat here. One of the questions was, how much do you encourage your setters to tell your hitters what they're running before the opponent serves the ball? I'll say from the Harvard side of things, our setters have hand signals for every single thing. They're always communicating before the start of the serve. That being said, there's things during the play that need additional communication. And so we might tell our outside to run a go, our middle to run a 31, and then our right side to run a red, which is just a typical right side set. But if the pass gets pulled into zone 4, that middle might go for a back one all of a sudden. And so that's something that we just audible, but we do have our set calls. Eryn, what about you guys?
Yeah, I'd say we're the same. I mean, before the serve goes, we're definitely, our setters are telling our hitters what they're hitting. And then kind of like Ahen's alluded to too, I mean, once we get into it and maybe an in-system, out-of-system situation off defense, it's a lot of audibling. We really typically try to keep our pins on the pins. So from our middles especially, there's a lot of audibling going on as to what different plays to run.
Awesome. Another question in the chat. How do you mix up the personnel during practice? Do you guys try to keep the starters together so that they practice the relationships, or do a full mix-up of players? From the Harvard side of things, we typically will mix up earlier in the season, and then as the season kind of progresses, once for our season, maybe a third of the way through, we hit into conference play. We're starting to get a little bit more of an A side and B side. But it really just depends on where we're at and how close certain position battles may be. Ahen, you want to answer that from your side of things?
Yeah, I'll actually answer the previous question too.
Oh, sure, yep.
Play calling. Even though my entire team, and probably Harvard and every other school in the conference that scouts us, everyone knows that we're running to the pins. So our setters know it. I just like the affirmation. I like the conversation. I like the setter just, going to the outside and saying, hey, like, we already know this. But what the setter opposite middle thing allowed us to do is just create a lot of conversation about between setters and middles. Because you're a setter with only just the one middle for all 3 rotations. Whereas in the traditional 6-2, middles have to deal with 2 different setters. We've created a situation where a setter in the middle have to have that relationship, and they can evolve that relationship based on what those 2 can do. Whereas my opposite doesn't need the relationship as strong. We just try to set a more consistent ball regardless of the setter. Whereas in the middle, we had a 6-4 middle versus a 6-1 middle. We had a setter who's better at jump setting and reaching high versus Bailey, who's a little lower to the ground and sets a little bit closer to her face, right? And so it created the opportunity for those guys to develop that relationship in a high way. And so that kind of feeds into the next question. I mean, season to season, it's been different. We do a lot of mix-up in preseason. I think quickly as we get into non-conference play, we go a lot of starters. We need to get a rhythm with our A side, B side, and make adjustments where they go. I actually would like to go more mix-up as we go through towards the end, because I think it stresses my starters to carry more of a load to win the competition. So I have a little bit of starters on both sides competing with each other. That's ideally for me. I think this past season, we kind of did what Harvard did. We went more A side versus B side as the conference season went on, because we were constantly retooling something. We were trying to get a gauge for those side out situations that we needed to get better at. Kind of like Eryn alluded to, we had a middle who got hurt the week prior to conference play. So we had to stay with that A side versus B side. make that adjustment and to get better with it as time goes on.
But even as, I mean, there were still days as we went deep into the season too, where we just kind of walk into practice planning and we'd be like, we want to mix up today. So there were still some, I remember doing some like Monday or Wednesday practices where we'd still kind of just, maybe it wasn't for so much of like an offensive serve receive type drill, but for some sort of like wash drill or things like that, we'd mix it up. But we typically have at least one drill in practice where we would go A side, B side.
Now, do you guys find if you mix it up, or let's frame it the other way, if you guys do A side, B side, do you find that there's more drama between the girls of, you know, I'm not on the A side, I'm on the B side today, and just I'm mad about that, or versus mixing it up and kind of making it a big question mark as a coach?
I mean, I think that just comes down to the maturity of the team. So year to year, it changes. I like mixing it up only because it does give life to the players that don't get as much playing time. You know, I mean, I do think it is important to engage our team that way. But I think as a competitor, I don't really expect you to like being on B side. But I do expect you to, you know, have some joy with it, give life to it. And so I try to meet them halfway even before any conversations are had. Just, you know, I just think of myself as a player and just try to mix it up occasionally, especially early in the week. Because it's not a bad thing to make your starters, you know, try to control more of the game, you know, because it could happen at any moment when someone gets hurt and you have to make that in-game adjustment, you know. So I think it comes down to the maturity of the team. I think last year we almost mixed up exclusively. This, as in 2018 and 2019, we did more A side, B side. So we had to have a couple conversations, and it was just a question of like, you can choose to give life to what you're doing, or you can pout about it, you know. And it really comes down to the maturity of the team, you know.
Sure.
And I think that gets better as you establish culture.
Ahen, you had a question in the chat. Apparently your video was a little bit in and out when you were explaining working the inside out approach. Can you go through and explain that again after your transition, picking up a tip and trying to approach?
Yeah, Eryn, I don't know if you can go back to 6-on-6 stuff, but it might be a little bit easier to do this. But we had our off blocker. So for example, our outside and our right side, the ball gets set to the Harvard outside. We kind of put our outside hitter as the off blocker in charge of any tips around the 3-meter line, right? And so, you know, there's a whole debate. Should the setter take it because she's closer? I mean, again, I think whoever can take it. So, Eryn, I don't know if you can find that scenario.
Yeah, I don't know.
So I'll talk through it until you can find it. But
yeah.
It's one of those things where if my outside hitter is pulled way inside the court, that's a setter dig there. No one's tipping because it's preseason. Everyone's hit the ball.
Yeah, this was like day 3, so everyone's still wailing at it.
So,
Here, Eryn, stop sharing, and I'll do this on a whiteboard here.
Yeah,
yeah.
There we go.
So we're gonna draw this out a little bit. So we got a court.
wow, so good, Jared.
I'm an expert drawer.
It's like you've done before.
So we got 2 blockers here. We got an attacker here. Might have a defense here. And so it'd be this person going over and picking up the tip, right?
Yeah, and so, I mean, yeah, if she's pulled way in there just to go pursue the tip, I don't know if you can draw like a curve, but that outside needs to hit the ball. And we want to be able to, so you can debate whether or not the setter should take that or not. I really like my outside hitting it because in my setter's hands, I feel like if my outside does a good job with that ball, again, if we can anticipate a tip, then it almost becomes a free ball for us. We put that in a good spot. In my setter's hands, all of a sudden, the middle could become an option. The opposite's an option. The pipe becomes an option. So for my outside, in order to keep our offense fast, we try to work on this a lot, where our outside, instead of getting all the way wide, they just go inside out. It's really important that my outside gets behind the 10-meter line or the 3-meter line or the 10-foot line there. So you can see that little curve that Jared made. It's important that they get outside of there, and then they're in tempo, in stride for the attack. It's just a little different because the angle of approach is coming from the inside of the court to the pin, as opposed to Jared, you can draw the normal approach for an outside. Yeah. You know, typically
it would be out here.
That would be typical in a side out position. You know, if my outside hitter doesn't even have to play the ball at all, I want my outsides going outside immediately. You know, and this is in a free ball situation, outside more. You can just take them all the way outside. Sure. More. Yeah, I mean, that'd be great. You know, that'd be great, but, you know, she has a defensive responsibility and she has a serve receive responsibility. So as long as she can read and create a situation where she can, you know, she knows she's not responsible for those things, she can go out there early, and then it creates a faster offense because we're already out there. But she has to play tip coverage. She's inside. And so I don't want to create a situation where my opponents feel like they can tip to my outside and take her out of it. I want to give my outside the ability and the training to turn that tip transition into an in-system offense.
Awesome. I'm going to answer this question here. Hold on. Something's in the way. How do you adjust if your B team is not playing at the speed of your competition? I'll say that we deal with this a lot with our men's team at Harvard. Our B side just is not very strong. We've got a couple A side players that kind of carry our team. And the teams that we're playing against, we have a really hard time replicating. And essentially what we do is we end up stacking the drills and the scoring against our A side. And so we do a drill called one stop, where our A side is getting every ball at them, and it's an offensive drill. And so it might be a serve at them, a down ball at them, a free ball at them, and another serve at them. And they got to win those 4, or sometimes we do 5. They've got to win all 5 of those in a row. And our defensive side, or B side, only has to get 1 stop in order to set them back to the start of it. And so our B side has to get maybe 5 or 6 stops before our A side can get those 5 in a row a couple times. And so we just stack it against the A side and make the drill their competition, more so when you know that their B side can't really push them the same way. Eryn, Ahen, do you guys do anything different?
Yeah, we do some other things as you guys. You know, if it's about the talent level, you know, certainly the A side is the A side for a reason. You know, you can throw a coach on the B side to challenge the A side a little bit more if you're more 2 years, and she still plays a lot of beach, so she's still pretty much, she was a middle, and she's pretty good on the pin now, just in terms of the movement. You know, just because in Europe she had to learn all the skills, very different from the U.S. system. So, you know, that's one way to do it. And then we do similar things. You know, maybe we do side out scoring for the A side and then rally score for the B side. Maybe you have to do 2 side outs for the A side and normal scoring for the B side. If the question is about motivation and the B side not playing as hard because they're on the B side, I think it's just a separate conversation. Again, going back to culture and maturity, and in that situation, I'll just pull the player aside and just see what's going on with her, and, you know, try to, you know, talk her into, you know, seeing what's going on in her head mentally. But, you know, just if it's just purely you know, an effort thing, as long as it's not an effort thing, those are some things you can do if there is that big disparity. But kind of like I said, like, I actually don't mind mixing it up as long as everyone's playing hard. So kind of talking earlier, because in last year's system, I had my middle and my setter opposite each other for all 3 rotations. Even when we mixed up, something we didn't do was we wanted to make sure, even in mixed teams, the setter and the middle that end up playing together are always on the same side. So there you can still work on certain things. And it's kind of a better way to get the middle and the setter to rely on each other because they know they have each other, and you take out their go-to outside away from them. You know, so now you force the conversation, you force the relationship in some of those situations by mixing up. So there are just some creative ways to do it. There are creative ways to get your goals accomplished for your A-side players, even in a mix-up situation.
Sure. Awesome. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you guys for your time jumping on. And Ahen and Eryn, if you guys want to put your emails in the chat, if you guys have any questions for them, I'm sure they would be more than willing to help out in any way. So thank you guys all for coming, and we'll have our last day tomorrow. Talking about defense with the University of Rhode Island coach, Nikki Holmes. So we'll see you then. Bye.